The war room door hissed open and Empress Calithea felt her breathing tubes constrict. 3 of her generals lay dead on the crystalline floor, their violet blood pooling beneath tactical displays that flickered with disaster. Commander Thane stood over them, a human sidearm still raised, his face carved from stone. "Traitors," he said simply, meeting her 4 eyes without flinching. "They were feeding coordinates to the Krent fleet. I have the transmissions." Calithea's daughter, Princess Seriath, her wife of 6 months in this cursed political marriage, stepped between them, her small human frame trembling. "Mother, please!" "Let him explain before. Silence!" The word dropped like a blade. Calithea's crest flared crimson, the color of execution. Around them, her royal guard raised plasma rifles, the charging hum building toward violence. She had agreed to this union to secure Earth's military support, to bind the human fleet to her failing empire. Instead, this soft-skinned creature had just executed her highest officers in her own command center. Thane lowered his weapon with deliberate slowness, placing it on the table beside a hollow display showing Krent dreadnoughts burning through the outer colonies. "Your Majesty, in 30 seconds, those transmissions would have given the enemy our fleet positions for the counteroffensive. We'd have lost everything. You murdered Imperial generals on assumption." Calithea's voice could have frozen stars. "On evidence." He touched the display. Communications logs materialized, encrypted channels, payment transfers in Krent currency. The timestamps were damning. "General Vexthar's son is a POW on Krent Prime. They threatened to flay him alive. General Sulnix was drowning in gambling debt. Colonel Thresh." He paused. "Colonel Thresh just hated humans enough to betray you rather than let me help win this war." Seriath made a small sound of horror. She'd fought alongside Sulnix, had called Vexthar uncle. Calithea felt her daughter's pain like acid in her own veins, but she couldn't look away from Thane. The human stood utterly still, not pleading, not justifying. Just waiting. "Captain Vorik," Calithea commanded. Her senior guard commander stepped forward, scales rigid with tension. "Verify these transmissions. Majesty, the human could have fabricated, verify them." The silence that followed tasted of lightning. Vorik worked the controls with shaking claws, cross-referencing against Imperial intelligence databases, running authentication protocols. Each confirmation hit like a hammer blow. Finally he straightened, his crest pale with shame. "Authentic, Your Majesty. All 3 were. The evidence is conclusive." Calithea felt something crack inside her chest. These were officers she promoted, strategists she trusted with billions of lives. And they'd been selling her people to the enemy while she slept. While she'd been so focused on resenting this marriage, this human husband forced upon her daughter, she'd missed the rot in her own command structure. "How did you know?" The question emerged quieter than she'd intended. Thane's jaw tightened. "I didn't sleep last night. Seriath was having nightmares about the colony massacres, so I was watching the fleet reports, looking for patterns in the Krent attacks. They were too precise, too targeted." Someone was talking. He gestured to the bodies without remorse. "I set up a false operation, planted fake fleet movements in the system, and monitored who accessed them. These 3 accessed the files and transmitted within minutes. I confronted Vexthar first. He confirmed the others before I killed him. You interrogated an Imperial general." Calithea's crest flared again. "I questioned a traitor. There's a difference. In my empire, humans do not execute. In your empire, humans are married to princesses they've never met to secure military alliances." Thane's voice remained level, but something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "I didn't ask for this war. I didn't ask to be bonded to your daughter in some ceremony I don't understand, with vows I can barely pronounce. But Earth sent me here because I'm the best tactical commander we have, and Sareth agreed to this marriage because she loves her people more than her freedom. So now I'm here, and I will do whatever it takes to win this war, including the things you can't do yourself." Sareth touched her mother's arm, the gesture desperately gentle. "He saved the fleet, Mother. The counteroffensive launches in 2 hours. If those transmissions had gone through." Calathier stared at the blood on her floor, at the human who created this catastrophe and this salvation in the same breath. Her empire was dying. The Krynth had shattered 4 systems in as many months, and her own generals had been helping them do it. This cold-eyed human was right. She'd been losing this war because she'd been playing it like a dance of honor and protocol. Thane played it like war. "Captain Vorik," she said slowly, "seal this room. No one speaks of what happened here. The official record will state that these 3 died in a Krynth infiltration attack." She turned to Thane, forcing herself to meet his alien gaze directly. "You will report to Fleet Command in 1 hour. You will assume tactical command of the counteroffensive." "Mother," Sareth breathed. "I'm not finished." Calathier stepped closer to Thane, close enough to see her reflection in his strange, round pupils. "If you ever execute one of my officers again without bringing me evidence first, I will have you tried and executed regardless of the consequences." "Is that understood, Commander?" "Perfectly, Your Majesty." "Good. Now get out of my sight and go win me a battle." Thane saluted with that crisp human gesture, turned, and walked out without another word. Sareth hesitated, caught between her mother and her husband, then hurried after him. The door sealed, leaving Calathier alone with her guards and her dead. Captain Vorik cleared his throat carefully. "Majesty, the troops will not easily accept a human in tactical command." "Then they'll learn," Calathier said, staring at the blood. "Or they'll die. At this point, I'm not certain which I prefer." She pulled up the tactical display, studying the formation Thane had been analyzing before her generals had tried to kill them all. The human had reorganized her entire fleet structure in the hours before dawn, implementing a formation doctrine she'd never seen before. It was aggressive, ruthless, utterly divorced from imperial tactical philosophy. It might actually work. Calathier touched the comm. "All fleet commanders, this is the Empress. Commander Thane has full tactical authority for the counteroffensive. Anyone who questions his orders will be relieved and court-martialed." She paused. "And if we survive this, someone find out if humans have a word for what happens when you respect someone you desperately wish to hate." The fleet launched 2 hours later, and Calathier watched from her command throne as the human she'd barely acknowledged in 6 months of marriage rewrote everything she thought she knew about war. The first wave hit the Krynth blockade like a hammer striking glass. Thane had split the Imperial fleet into hunting packs, small, fast groups that ignored every principle of mass formation warfare. On the main display, Calathier watched her dreadnoughts scatter across a 3-dimensional battlefield that made her tactical instincts scream in protest. "He's fragmenting our strength," General Kosseth hissed beside her. "The Krynth will destroy us piecemeal." "Then why haven't they?" Calathier gestured to the enemy formation, which was already showing confusion. The Krynth fought in massive wall formations, designed to concentrate fire and overwhelm through superior numbers. Thane's scattered groups were slipping through the gaps, hitting supply ships and command vessels while avoiding direct engagement with the heavy battleships. "Fleet Group 7, break off pursuit and reform at NAV Point Theta." Thane's voice came through the command channel, calm and precise. "Fleet Group 3, you have firing solutions on their command carrier. Execute on my mark." Calathier pulled up Group 3's tactical display. They were 6 light cruisers, pathetically outgunned by the Krynth carrier, and its escorts. Suicide to engage directly. But Thane wasn't ordering a direct engagement. He'd positioned them in the carrier sensor shadow, using the carrier's own mass to hide their approach. When they fired, it would be at point-blank range against unshielded engines. Mark! The carrier died in a bloom of white fire. Its escort ships scattered, and, suddenly, the Krenth wall formation was missing its center of coordination. Thane's hunting packs closed in like predators scenting blood. Sarioth stood at Thane's side in the tactical center below, her scales reflecting the light of 1,000 status displays. Calathea watched her daughter watch her husband, and something uncomfortable twisted in her chest. This marriage had been arranged in desperation, a political bargaining chip to secure Earth's help. She'd never asked Sarioth how she felt about being traded like cargo to a species they barely understood. Now her daughter stood beside this human as he casually dismantled enemy fleets, and the trust between them was visible even from here. "Majesty, the Krenth are repositioning," Captain Vorik reported. "They're pulling back to fortress formation." Calathea studied the enemy movement. Fortress formation was defensive, designed to create overlapping fields of fire that nothing could penetrate. It would stall the offensive, give the Krenth time to regroup and call reinforcements. "Commander Thane," she said into the calm, "they're going defensive. Recommend we consolidate before. Negative, Your Majesty. Fleet Groups 2, 5, and 8 prepare for Maneuver Tartarus." Calathea pulled up the tactical database, searching for any Imperial maneuver with that designation. Nothing. "Commander, what is?" The 3 fleet groups dove toward the planet below, entering atmosphere at speeds that made their hulls scream. The Krenth fortress formation couldn't fire without hitting the planet's surface. Their own invasion forces were down there. Thane had just turned the Krenth ground assault into a shield. "He's insane," Kosseth whispered. "Those ships aren't designed for atmospheric combat at those speeds. The heat stress alone, Fleet Groups 2, 5, and 8, you are weapons free on ground targets. Priority, anti-orbital batteries and command centers. You have 6 minutes before heat damage becomes critical. Make them count." The 3 groups streaked across the planet's surface like falling stars, their weapons carving through Krenth ground installations with surgical precision. Anti-orbital batteries exploded, command bunkers vanished in plasma fire. The Krenth fleet above couldn't intervene without massacring their own troops. 5 minutes and 40 seconds later, the 3 groups punched back into space, their hulls glowing red but intact, and the Krenth fortress formation had lost its ground support. The enemy fleet was now trapped between Thane's forces and a planet they could no longer use as a base. "All fleet groups, converge and engage. They have nowhere to run." The battle that followed was brutally efficient. The Krenth tried to break formation and scatter, but Thane's hunting packs had already cut off every escape vector. They tried to fight, but without coordination and ground support, they were just targets. In 43 minutes, the Krenth blockade that had held the system for 3 months simply ceased to exist. Calathea stared at the tactical display in something approaching awe. She'd been fighting this war for 2 years, trading ships, and lives for inches of space. Thane had just reconquered an entire system in under an hour, and his casualty reports were showing minimal losses. "Commander Thane, report to the command center immediately." When he arrived, with Sarioth beside him, the entire command staff turned to stare. The human looked exhausted, his uniform soaked with sweat, but his eyes were still that same focused calm. Sarioth's crest was high with pride, and she stood close enough to her husband that their shoulders touched. "Your Majesty." Thane's salute was precise despite his obvious fatigue. Calathea descended from her throne, approaching him slowly. The command center had gone utterly silent. "Commander Thane, In 6 months of marriage to my daughter, you have spoken perhaps 20 words to me directly. You have attended ceremonies like a statue, followed protocols like a prisoner, and given me every reason to believe this alliance was a mistake." She saw Saria tense, saw something flicker in Thane's eyes. "Today, you murdered 3 of my generals, assumed command of my fleet, and rewrote 2 centuries of imperial tactical doctrine in the span of a single battle." She stopped directly in front of him. "Explain to me why I should ever let you out of my sight again." Thane met her gaze steadily. "Because I'll do it again, your majesty. The Krynth aren't fighting with honor. They're fighting to exterminate your species. You can either let me fight them the way they need to be fought, or you can keep losing with dignity." The command center held its breath. Calathier felt her crest flare, felt the weight of every eye on her. This human was challenging her authority in front of her entire command staff. He was right, and they both knew it, but he was still a human, still the foreigner she'd been forced to accept, still the only reason her people had won today. "General Kossith," she said without looking away from Thane, "you are relieved of fleet command. Commander Thane, you are promoted to Supreme Strategic Commander of all Imperial forces. You will report directly to me, and you will have absolute authority over all military operations." The command center erupted in shocked hissing and crest flaring. Kossith's scales went white with rage. "Majesty, you cannot, I can, and I have. Commander Thane has just demonstrated more tactical competence in 1 hour than this entire staff has shown in 2 years. If anyone here believes they can do better, you are welcome to challenge him in the war room right now." She let the threat hang in the air. "Otherwise, you will follow his orders as you would follow mine." Kossith stared at her, then at Thane, then turned and stalked out of the command center. 3 other generals followed him. Calathier watched them go without expression. "Anyone else?" The remaining officers slowly straightened to attention. Captain Vorik was the first to salute Thane, his expression carefully neutral. One by one, the others followed. Thane turned to Calathier, and, for the first time, she saw something like respect in his eyes. "Thank you, your majesty." "Don't thank me, Commander. You've just inherited responsibility for an empire that's losing a war of extermination. If you fail, we all die." She gestured to the tactical display. "Now tell me how you plan to win." Thane studied the strategic map, the vast expanse of Krynth-occupied space, the dwindling Imperial territory. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire command center. "The Krynth think of war as conquest. They take systems, hold them, move forward. It's methodical, patient, overwhelming." He touched the display, highlighting Krynth supply lines. "But it requires infrastructure, supply chains, communication networks. They've overextended trying to finish you quickly, and that overextension is a weakness." He pulled up a star chart showing deep space routes. "We stopped defending territory. We stopped trying to hold systems. We become raiders. We hit their supply lines, destroy their shipyards, make every conquered system cost more to hold than it's worth. We make them bleed logistics until they're forced to withdraw or starve. Guerrilla warfare." Calathier said slowly. "You want to turn the Imperial fleet into pirates. I want to turn the Imperial fleet into a fleet that wins." Thane's expression was granite. "You've been fighting like an empire that still has the strength to hold ground. You don't. But you have something better. Ships that can jump, captains who know this space intimately, and an enemy that's stretched too thin to guard everything. So we make them guard everything. We make them paranoid. We make them weak." Saria spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but steady. "It will mean abandoning colonies. Leaving civilians under Krynth occupation while we raid." "Yes." Thane didn't soften the truth. "For a time. But if we keep fighting the way we've been fighting, those colonies will be exterminated anyway, along with everyone else. This way, we trade short-term suffering for long-term survival." Calathea looked at her daughter, saw the pain in her eyes. Sereth had grown up believing in the Empire's duty to protect its people, to never abandon them regardless of cost. This human was asking her to embrace a colder calculus. "Sereth," Calathea said gently, "what do you think?" Her daughter was silent for a long moment, staring at the map of dying worlds. Finally she straightened, her crest rising with decision. "I think my husband understands war better than we do. And I think if we don't start winning soon, there won't be anyone left to protect." Thane touched her hand, a brief gesture of support that made Calathea's chest tighten. 6 months ago, she traded her daughter to this stranger like a piece on a board. Now they stood together like they'd been forged in the same fire. "Very well, Commander. We'll do it your way." Calathea pulled up the fleet rosters. "You have 3,000 ships, scattered across 14 systems. How long until you can begin operations?" "I already have." Thane pulled up a separate display showing 6 fleet groups already moving into Krynth space. "I started deploying raiding groups 3 weeks ago." The command center went dead silent. Calathea felt her breathing tubes seal. "You deployed Imperial fleets without authorization?" "I deployed the fleets Sereth gave me authorization to deploy." Thane's voice remained calm. "She's a princess of the realm. She had the authority." Calathea turned to her daughter slowly. Sereth met her gaze without flinching, though her scales betrayed her nervousness. "You authorized military operations without consulting me. I authorized my husband to begin preparing defensive measures 3 weeks ago, when it became clear the Krynth were preparing for a major offensive." Sereth's voice was steady. "He didn't tell me what those measures were. I trusted him to make the right decision." "Convenient." Calathea studied them both, these two who'd apparently been working together while she'd been dismissing Thane as an irrelevant political ornament. "And if I discovered this earlier, then we'd have had this conversation earlier," Thane said simply. "But we'd still be having it. Because this is the only way to win, Your Majesty. You can hate it, you can hate me, but you can't argue with the mathematics. The Krynth have more ships, more territory, more resources. The only way we win is by making them pay for every inch, until the cost of occupation exceeds the value of conquest." Calathea looked at the display showing Thane's raiding groups, already striking at Krynth supply depots deep in enemy space. The early reports were devastating: fuel stations destroyed, supply convoys annihilated, communication hubs reduced to debris. The Krynth wouldn't even know what had hit them yet. She should be furious. She should have both of them arrested for insubordination. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years of losing this war. "Hope, Captain Vorik," she said quietly. "Begin full implementation of Commander Thane's strategic plan. All fleet groups are to transition to raiding operations within 48 hours. "Yes, Your Majesty." Calathea turned back to Thane and Sereth, these two who'd somehow become partners while she wasn't looking. "Commander, you will brief me daily on all operations. Princess Sereth, you will attend these briefings. If you two are going to continue making decisions that affect the survival of our empire, you will do so with full transparency." "Is that understood?" "Yes, Mother," Sereth said, relief flooding her voice. "Yes, Your Majesty," Thane echoed. "Good. Now get out of here before I remember to be angry." She watched them leave together, her daughter and this strange, cold, brilliant human who'd just given her the first real chance of victory she'd had since this nightmare began. Captain Vorik approached cautiously. "Majesty, the staff will need time to adjust to the commander's methods. Then, they'll adjust quickly or they'll be replaced." Calathier stared at the tactical display, at the burning remains of the Krent blockade, at the raiding groups already deep in enemy space. For the first time in 2 years, the Krent were the ones bleeding. And Calathier found herself smiling. The war changed overnight. Thane's raiding group struck like lightning across Krent space, appearing from nowhere to destroy infrastructure and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Fuel depots burned, shipyards exploded, supply convoys died in the dark between stars. The Krent, who'd been steadily grinding the Empire into dust, suddenly found themselves defending everything and protecting nothing. Calathier watched it unfold from her command center, Thane and Sereth working side by side at the tactical station below. Her daughter had transformed in these past weeks, shedding the ceremonial princess role to become something harder, sharper. She anticipated Thane's orders now, coordinated fleet movements with an intuition that shocked the senior commanders. Fleet Group 12 reports successful strike on the Hall shipyards, Sereth announced, her voice carrying across the center. Estimated damage: 3 heavy cruisers destroyed during construction. Fabrication facilities offline for minimum 6 months. Casualties? Thane asked, not looking up from his calculations. Minimal. 2 light cruisers with reparable damage, no losses. Calathier descended from her throne, approaching the tactical station. On the display, Krent's space was lit with dozens of strike markers, each one a bleeding wound in their occupation infrastructure. Commander, the Krent High Command has pulled 4 dreadnought groups back from the front lines to guard their core systems. As predicted, Thane highlighted the repositioned forces. They're defending shipyards and supply hubs now instead of pushing the offensive. They've gone from conquest to consolidation, which means we're winning. Thane finally looked up, and his expression made Calathier's chest tighten. No, Your Majesty. It means we've stopped losing. There's a difference. Before she could respond, alarm shrieked across the command center. The tactical display exploded with contacts, hundreds of them, appearing at the edge of sensor range. Krent signatures, but the formation was wrong, too organized, too precise. Contact report, Captain Vorik barked. Krent Grand Fleet. The sensor officer's voice shook. 437 vessels, including 12 super dreadnoughts. They're in assault formation, heading straight for the capital system. The command center went deathly quiet. Calathier felt ice crystallize in her veins. The capital system. The homeworld. 3 billion civilians, and the heart of what remained of her empire. Time to arrival? 72 hours at current speed. 72 hours. 3 days to prepare for annihilation. Calathier pulled up the capital defense grid. 400 defending ships against 437 attackers, but the attackers had super dreadnoughts, planet killers designed to reduce worlds to ash. Recall all raiding groups, she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear screaming through her nervous system. We need every ship defending the homeworld. No. She turned slowly to find Thane staring at the tactical display with that terrible, focused calm. Commander, that was not a request. And my answer is still no. He pulled up the fleet dispositions. If we recall the raiding groups, we concentrate our forces in one system. The Krent will destroy us in a single battle, and then there's nothing left to stop them from exterminating every remaining colony. We lose everything. If we don't defend the capital, 3 billion civilians die. If we defend the capital the way you want to, 3 billion civilians die and we lose the fleet. Thane's eyes met hers, and there was no mercy in them. Your Majesty, you promoted me because I win battles. Let me win this one. Sereth touched his arm, her expression stricken. Thane, my mother is right. We cannot abandon the homeworld. I'm not suggesting we abandon it. I'm suggesting we defend it intelligently. He manipulated the display, showing fleet movements. The Krynth are committing their entire grand fleet to this assault. Everything they have. Which means their occupied systems are defended by garrison forces and local militia. Weak. Vulnerable. Calathier understood before he finished speaking, and the understanding tasted like poison. You want to let them attack the capital while we raid their home systems. I want to make them pay for every ship they commit to this assault. Thane's voice was granite. We leave enough forces here to make the battle costly, to make them bleed for every inch. But the raiding groups hit their core worlds, the systems they stripped to build this grand fleet. We burn their shipyards, destroy their infrastructure, kill their civilians. You're talking about genocide. I'm talking about survival. Thane's expression didn't change. The Krynth committed genocide against the Velshera species last year. 12 billion dead. They've made it clear they intend to do the same to your people. I'm simply proposing we demonstrate that extinction cuts both ways. Sariat stepped back from him, her scales paling. Around the command center, officers stared in horror. Calathier felt something break inside her chest. That makes us monsters. That makes us alive. Thane turned to face her fully. Your Majesty, I understand this is horrifying. I understand it violates everything your culture believes about honorable warfare. But the Krynth aren't interested in honor. They're interested in extermination. You can fight them with clean hands and die with your principles intact, or you can fight them the way they fight you and, maybe, survive long enough to rebuild something worth saving. He's right, Majesty. Everyone turned to find General Costa standing in the command center entrance, his scales dark with shame. The general who'd walked out in protest when Thane was promoted now approached the tactical display with slow, deliberate steps. I've spent 2 years fighting this war honorably, Costa said quietly, following every protocol, respecting every tradition. And I've watched the Krynth slaughter billions while I did it. The commander is correct. If we fight them with honor, we simply die with honor. If we want to win. He trailed off, staring at the grand fleet bearing down on the homeworld. Calathier looked at Sariat, saw her daughter's internal struggle reflected in every shift of her scales. This human had killed that innocent, principled girl who'd married him 6 months ago. He'd turned her into something harder, something capable of weighing billions of lives on a tactical display. But he'd also kept her alive. How many ships can we spare for the capital defense? Calathier asked, her voice hollow. Thane pulled up the calculations. 150. Enough to force the Krynth to commit their full strength, to take casualties that will hurt them. But not enough to win. And the casualties among the civilian population? Significant. The Krynth will bombardment cities once they break through the defense grid. Estimates range from 500 million to 2 billion dead, depending on how long the defensive fleet can hold. 2 billion. The number sat in Calathier's chest like a collapsing star. 2 billion of her people dead, while she ordered her fleets to go raiding like pirates. She thought of the children, the families, the civilians who trusted her to protect them. Mother! Sariatha's voice cracked. There has to be another way. There isn't. Calathier stared at the grand fleet, at the countdown ticking toward annihilation. Commander Thane, implement your strategy. Fleet Group 1 through 5 will defend the capital. All other groups will strike Krynth core systems with maximum prejudice. Target civilian infrastructure. Make them bleed. The command center erupted in protest. Officers shouted, crests flared in rage and horror. Captain Vorik stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. Majesty, if we do this, we become what we're fighting against. We become murderers. No, Captain. We become survivors. Calathier descended from her throne one final time, approaching Thane at the tactical station. "Commander, you have full authority to conduct this operation. I want the Krent to wake up and find their homeworlds burning. I want them to understand that if they exterminate my people, theirs will follow." Thane saluted crisply. "Yes, your majesty." "And, Commander?" She met his eyes, letting him see the cost of this decision in her expression. "If we survive this war, I will never forgive you for making this necessary." "I understand, your majesty." No apology in his voice, no regret. Just that same terrible calm. She turned to leave, then paused. "Sarioth, you will remain here and coordinate the defense. I'm going to the capital to die with my people." "Mother, no, that was not a request." Calithea kept walking, her spine straight and her heart full of ice. Behind her, she heard Sarioth begin to cry, heard Thane's soft voice murmuring comfort. 3 days later, the Krent Grand Fleet arrived at the capital system and found 150 Imperial ships waiting in perfect defensive formation. Calithea stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the enemy fleet deploy, knowing she would never see another sunrise. "All ships," she commanded. "Make them pay for every inch." The battle began. It lasted 19 hours. The Imperial fleet fought with desperate courage, trading ships for time, lives for minutes. They destroyed 73 Krent vessels before the line finally broke, and the bombardment of the homeworld began. Calithea watched cities burn from orbit, watched her civilization turn to ash, and waited for the end. It came as orbital fire, as her flagship shields failed and Krent weapons carved through the hull. In her final moments, she thought of Sarioth, of the daughter she traded like currency and who'd somehow found love in that transaction. Then the universe turned white, and Empress Calithea died defending her people. Sarioth felt her mother die across the quantum link implant all Imperial royalty shared. The sensation hit like physical trauma, a sudden absence where connection had always been, a silence that screamed. She collapsed at the tactical station, her breathing tubes sealing in shock. Thane caught her before she hit the floor, his arms strong and steady. Around them, the command center dissolved into chaos as news of the Empress's death spread. Officers wailed in grief, crests flaring colors of mourning. The Empire had just lost its heart. "Sarioth!" Thane's voice cut through her spiral of anguish. "I need you to focus. Look at me." She forced her eyes to meet his, saw something fierce and protective burning there. "Your mother is dead. The capital is burning. In approximately 30 seconds, every commander in this fleet is going to look to you for orders because you're now the Empress." His hands framed her face with surprising gentleness. "You can fall apart later. Right now, your people need you to be strong. Can you do that?" Could she? Her mother was dead. 3 billion civilians were dead or dying. The homeworld was being reduced to ash while she stood here safe in this command center. What right did she have to? "Sarioth, can you be strong?" She looked into her husband's eyes, this human who'd killed and strategized and turned her entire world inside out and found something she hadn't expected. Faith. He believed she could do this. Somehow, impossibly, he believed. "Yes," she whispered. "Good." He helped her stand, his hand warm against her scales. "Then, be the Empress they need." Sarioth straightened, feeling something hard and cold settle into her chest where grief had been consuming her. She turned to face the command center, and every eye locked on her instantly. "I am Empress Sarioth," she said, her voice carrying across the silence. "My mother died defending our people with honor. I intend to honor her sacrifice by winning this war. Commander Thane, status on the raiding operations?" Thane pulled up the tactical display, and Sereth heard the gasps across the command center. While the capital had been burning, Thane's raiding groups had struck 37 Krent core systems simultaneously. The damage reports were catastrophic. Shipyards destroyed on Krent Prime, Halth, Velcor, and Threshenel, Thane reported clinically. Civilian casualties estimated at 43 billion and rising. Supply infrastructure across all targeted systems has been reduced to pre-industrial levels. The Krent economic capacity has been set back approximately 50 years. 43 billion. The number was incomprehensible. Sereth felt her scales trying to pale in horror, forced them to hold steady colors through pure will. And the Grand Fleet? Trapped. Thane highlighted the enemy formation at the capital. They're sitting in a dead system with no supplies, no support, and no functioning infrastructure within 10 jumps. We've destroyed every fuel depot, every repair station, every supply convoy in range. They can either sit there and starve, or they can try to jump home on what fuel they have left. How long can they survive? 3 weeks, maybe 4 if they start rationing aggressively. Sereth stared at the Grand Fleet. 400 vessels strong, the greatest military force the Krent had ever assembled. Thane had turned it into a fleet of ghosts, stranded in a graveyard system with nowhere to go and no way to get there. Captain Vorik, recall all fleet groups. We're going to the capital. Your Majesty. Vorik protested carefully. The Grand Fleet is still combat capable. If we engage, we won't engage. We're going to watch them die. Sereth felt that cold thing in her chest spreading, numbing. Set up observation posts at maximum sensor range. I want to know the exact moment when they start killing each other for the remaining supplies. The command center went utterly silent. Thane studied her with an expression she couldn't read. Your Majesty, he said quietly. Are you certain? You told me we had to be willing to do whatever it takes to survive. You were right. So now we're going to sit here and watch the Krent Grand Fleet tear itself apart in the system they just genocide. And we're going to remember what they did here. She turned to face the entire command staff. This is what the Krent wanted. They wanted extermination. They wanted total war. Now they have it. The fleet jumped to the capital system 6 hours later. Sereth stood on the bridge of the new flagship, staring at the homeworld below. The planet was dying. Atmosphere burned, oceans boiled, continents were scorched to bedrock. 3 billion people reduced to ash and memory. And floating above it all, the Krent Grand Fleet sat in perfect formation, already starting to drift as power systems failed. Your Majesty, the communications officer called. We're receiving a transmission from the Krent flagship. They're requesting negotiation terms. Ignore it. Your Majesty, they're offering surrender. I said ignore it. Sereth's voice could have cut diamond. They didn't accept surrender when they bombarded the homeworld. They didn't negotiate when they exterminated the Velshera. They wanted total war. Now they have it. Over the next 3 weeks, Sereth watched the Krent Grand Fleet die. First came the riots as soldiers realized no rescue was coming. Then, the executions as officers tried to maintain order. Then, the mutinies. Finally, the ships started firing on each other, fighting over the last scraps of fuel and supplies. Thane stood beside her through all of it, silent and steady. He didn't try to comfort her, didn't tell her it would be okay. He just stayed close, a warm presence in the cold dark. I've become a monster, Sereth whispered one night, watching another Krent ship tear itself apart in civil war. You've become what you needed to become to keep your people alive, Thane said quietly. There's a difference. Is there? She turned to face him, this human who'd taught her to value survival over honor. My mother died believing in something better than this. She died defending the Empire's principles. What do I believe in now? Thane was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dying fleet. I don't know. But whatever it is, it will have to be enough to rebuild what we've lost. The last Krent ship went dark 43 hours later. 437 vessels, millions of soldiers, the pride of an empire, all dead in the system they tried to conquer. Sereth ordered the observation posts to withdraw. They left the Grand Fleet floating in the ruins of the capital like a monument to the cost of extinction. The war continued for another 8 months, but the Krent were broken. Without their Grand Fleet, without their core infrastructure, they couldn't hold the occupied systems. Imperial raiding groups picked apart the occupation forces, liberating colonies one by one. Finally, the Krent High Command sent a formal surrender request. Sereth met them in the ruins of the capital system, on a transport ship floating above the ashes of her homeworld. The Krent delegation arrived with elaborate ceremony, expecting traditional negotiation protocols. Instead, they found an empress standing in an empty cargo bay, flanked by her human husband and a single guard. The Empire accepts your surrender on the following terms, Sereth said, not bothering with preliminaries. Complete withdrawal from all occupied systems within 6 months. War reparations equivalent to 500 years of economic output. Permanent disarmament to police force levels. And the Krent High Command will stand trial for crimes against sapient species. The Krent lead negotiator's scales paled. Those terms are impossible. They would destroy our civilization. Good. Sereth smiled, and it was her husband's smile, cold and sharp. You tried to destroy mine. Consider this mercy. You get to survive. The other sapient nations will never support such harsh. The other sapient nations watched you exterminate the Velshera and did nothing. They'll watch you die just as quietly. She leaned forward. You have 48 hours to accept these terms. If you refuse, the Imperial fleet will begin systematic bombardment of your core worlds until nothing remains but ash and memory. Just like you did to us. The negotiator stared at her, finally, understanding. You become exactly what you fought against. No, Thane said quietly. She's become what she needed to become to win. There's a difference. The Krent surrendered 6 hours later. Sereth stood in the command center, watching the enemy fleets withdraw from Imperial space, and felt nothing. No triumph. No relief. Just that same cold emptiness that had filled her since her mother died. Your Majesty, Captain Vorik approached carefully. The victory celebrations are beginning across the remaining colonies. They're requesting your presence for the formal ceremony. Tell them their empress is mourning. She turned away from the tactical display, from the war she'd won at the cost of her soul. Thane found her hours later in their quarters, staring out at the stars. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her in the darkness. I killed 43 billion people, Sereth whispered. More than the Krent killed. More than anyone in recorded history. And I did it coldly, strategically, because you taught me that survival matters more than honor. I did. Was it worth it? Thane was quiet for a long time. Finally, he took her hand, his strange human fingers interweaving with her claws. I don't know. Ask me again in 100 years, when your people have rebuilt. When the children who survived because of your choices have children of their own. Ask me then if it was worth it. And if the answer is no, then we'll carry that weight together. He pulled her close, and Sereth rested her head against his shoulder, this human who'd come to her as a stranger and become the only solid thing in her shattered universe. I love you, she said, the words tasting like confession. I know. Thane's arms tightened around her. I love you too, even though loving me has cost you everything. They sat in the darkness, two people who'd won a war and lost themselves in the process, holding each other against the weight of what they'd become. Outside, the Empire celebrated victory. But in their quarters, the Empress and her human husband mourned the price of survival and wondered if anything they built from these ashes could ever be worth the cost. 5 years passed. The Empire rebuilt slowly, painfully. New colonies rose from the wreckage. The homeworld remained a tomb world, preserved as a memorial to the dead. Sereth ruled from a new capital, governing with the same cold efficiency she'd learned during the war. She was a good empress. Fair. Strategic. Utterly without mercy when necessity demanded. Her people called her Sereth the Survivor. Some called her Sereth the Terrible. None called her soft. Thane remained at her side, no longer supreme strategic commander, but simply the Empress's consort. He attended ceremonies with that same quiet presence, advised her in private, and never once mentioned the 43 billion deaths that haunted them both. They never had children. Sereth couldn't bring herself to bring new life into a universe she drowned in blood. But they endured. Then, on the 5th anniversary of the war's end, a ship arrived from Earth. The human delegation requested an audience with the Empress, claiming urgent business. Sereth received them in the throne room, Thane standing beside her throne as always. The lead diplomat was a woman named Chen, older than Thane, with eyes that had seen similar horrors. "Your Majesty," Chen said, bowing with human formality, "Earth extends its congratulations on your victory and requests the return of Commander Thane." The throne room went silent. Sereth felt her breathing tubes seal. "Explain." "Commander Thane's assignment was temporary, part of the military alliance treaty. The war is over. Earth requires his expertise for our own strategic planning." Chen's expression was professionally neutral. "We expect the transfer to be completed within the month." Sereth looked at Thane, saw no surprise in his expression. "You knew about this. The original treaty term was 5 years, or until war's end, whichever came first." His voice was quiet. "I'm surprised they waited this long. You can refuse. You're married to the Empress. Your position here is as your consort, not your commander." Thane met her eyes steadily. "I was sent here to help you win a war. We won. Now Earth needs me elsewhere." The words hit like plasma fire. Sereth felt something cracking in her chest, that cold thing she'd built to survive the war finally fracturing under this new weight. "I see." She turned to Chen, forcing her voice to remain level. "When does Earth require his presence?" "Transport leaves in 3 days, Your Majesty." 3 days. After 5 years of marriage, 5 years of partnership, 5 years of holding each other against the nightmares, she got 3 days of warning. Very well. This audience is concluded. The human delegation left. Sereth sat on her throne, staring at nothing, while Thane stood beside her in that same steady silence. "Say something," she finally whispered. "What do you want me to say?" "That you'll refuse. That you'll stay. That the last 5 years meant something more than a military assignment." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "That I'm not just another mission you completed." Thane was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt beside her throne, taking her hand in both of his. "Sereth, you're the most important person in my life. You're the reason I kept fighting when the war seemed hopeless. You're the reason I still believe in something beyond survival." He paused. "But I'm a soldier, and soldiers go where they're ordered. You're an Empress's consort. You could claim diplomatic immunity, refuse the transfer, and start a political incident between Earth and the Empire? Undermine the alliance that's keeping your people safe?" He shook his head. "You know I can't do that. You're too good a ruler to ask me to." He was right. Of course he was right. Sereth had built her reign on strategic necessity, on cold calculation, on doing what was required regardless of personal cost. now that calculation was taking away the only person who understood what she'd become. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know." Thane stood, pulling her into his arms. "I hate me too sometimes." They held each other in the throne room, and Sereth felt tears on her scales for the first time since the war ended. 3 days later, she stood in the shuttle bay, watching Thane load his personal effects onto the Earth transport. He traveled light, just a single case of belongings, like he'd never really settled into being her husband. "You could write," she said, hating how desperate she sounded. "The Earth Empire transmission lag is 6 months. By the time you got my letters, they'd be ancient history." Thane smiled sadly. "You know that. Then visit. Diplomatic missions, trade negotiations, Sereth." He cupped her face gently. "We both know that would be torture. Clean breaks heal better. Nothing about us has ever been clean." "No," he agreed quietly. "But maybe that's why we worked." The transport pilot called for final boarding. Thane picked up his case, then paused. "For what it's worth, you're the best ruler this empire could have. You're strong, you're strategic, and you care about your people even when that caring costs you everything." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers in the human gesture of affection she'd learned to crave. "Don't let what we did during the war define you forever. Build something better. Be something better. I don't know how to be anything but what you made me. Then learn. You're brilliant. You'll figure it out." He stepped back, and she felt the distance between them like a physical wound. "Goodbye, Sereth. Goodbye, Thane." She watched the transport launch, watched it climb into the sky and vanish into the stars, taking with it the only person who'd ever truly understood her. Captain Vorik found her an hour later, still standing in the empty shuttle bay. "Your Majesty, the Council is waiting for the budget review." "Of course they are." Sereth straightened, feeling the cold thing in her chest settling back into place, filling the gap Thane had left. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." She ruled for 40 more years, efficient and fair and utterly alone. She never remarried, never took another lover, just worked day after day, building her empire into something stable and strong. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if Thane had been right. If the 43 billion deaths had been worth it. If survival at any cost was really survival at all. But she never found an answer that satisfied her. Empress Sereth the Terrible died at the age of 83, collapsing at her desk while reviewing colony expansion proposals. They found her with her hand resting on an old photograph, her and Thane on their wedding day, 2 strangers forced together by political necessity, neither knowing they'd end up saving and destroying each other in equal measure. Her last words, whispered to the medical staff who tried to revive her. "Tell him it was worth it." But by then, Thane had been dead for 7 years, killed in some other war on some other world, fighting for some other cause. So the message died with her, and the Empire moved on, built on the foundation of blood and sacrifice, and 2 people who'd loved each other enough to become monsters together. And in the ruins of the capital system, the tomb world that had once been the homeworld, the memorial stones stood silent witness. 3 billion dead in the Great War. 43 billion Krent casualties. One empress who'd killed them all and spent the rest of her life wondering if she'd made the right choice. The universe kept spinning, and, eventually, even the monuments crumbled. But the story remained, passed down through generations. The tale of the human who taught an empire how to survive, and the empress who loved him enough to become the monster he needed her to be. Some called it a tragedy. Others called it victory. In the end, it was simply the truth, that sometimes love means becoming something you hate, and survival costs everything you hope to save. And that, perhaps, is the most human lesson of all.